Chapter 57. Singing Howlers and Failed Plans. James, it's madness. They come knocking on my door at all hours of the day. A third year even brought me biscuits with a love letter tied to them. Sirius exclaimed as he looked into the mirror at his laughing best friend. It appears some things never change. Just make sure you keep your curtains shut tight, so that none of the females can have a look-see when you step out the shower. James snorted, causing Sirius to groan and shake his head. It's the black charm, Sirius. Lily grinned, as she fluttered her eyelashes at him and made kissy faces. Sirius laughed. You're my best friend's wife, Lil. You don't count. Well, I don't know whether to be relieved or insulted. She laughed, just as a knock sounded at Sirius's door. I swear that better not be another female trying to hand me biscuits, he grumbled, as he threw a blanket over the mirror. Would it be better if they were dog biscuits? James shouted, though it was awfully muffled. Sirius snorted, but he went to the window by the door and peeked out, then sighed with relief. He opened the door and grinned at the two redheads that were standing on his doorstep. Thank goodness. I thought you were more girls trying to douse me with love potions, he said, as Fred and George snorted loudly. There may have been talk in the Gryffindor or common room about that very thing happening. Just watch yourself. George grinned. Oh dear. That's never good. Lily murmured, though it wasn't heard by Fred, George, or Sirius. What's up? Sirius asked, as he closed the door, and double-checked all of his windows to ensure the curtains were closed tightly. We need your help, Fred said, as Sirius walked over to the blanket and pulled it off the mirror. And that is what we needed your help with, he added with a grin, as he caught sight of Lily and James in the mirror. Is everything all right? Lily asked in a concerned tone. Oh yeah, everything is fine, George assured her quickly as he pulled a book out of his bag. Did Sirius tell you what Harry did this morning? James burst out laughing. Yes, he did. I wish I could have seen the look on that woman's face. Fred snorted. So you know all about Umbridge too then? He asked. Of course, Lily said with a disgusted scowl. Between Sirius and Salazar, we are well informed, and that woman is lucky I'm nowhere near her, she hissed. We were hoping that was the case, George said, as he laid a book on the table. Is that what I think it is? Sirius grinned. Yep, George said proudly. The complete compendium of Marauder pranks. He grinned as he held it up high. James, George, Fred, and Sirius bowed slightly in respect as the book was laid out before them on the table, but Lily only rolled her eyes. James, Fred said seriously, as he looked at him. When you gave this to us, we made you a promise that we would never use it to target a specific individual. However, we have to ask you if we can break that promise. We want to use this book, and all that glorious wonders, to target Umbridge, George added. James and Sirius grinned at them. Go get her, James said, causing the twins to high-five each other. Thanks. George laughed. We figured you'd say yes, but we just kind of wanted to make it official. We did make you a promise after all. Well, I do appreciate you asking, James said with a nod. But I'm curious, what have you used from it? Truthfully, not a whole lot, but we have pranked a few of our friends, 1 or 2 enemies, and a few have been used on the whole school. Harry was our test subject when we wanted to see what one of the pranks actually looked like. He didn't mind though, he always thought it was funny, Fred said with a grin, as James burst out laughing. Chaos will start tomorrow, although Peeves has already been doing his part. He throws food at her in the Great Hall, steals that awful pink hat of hers, and he loudly mocks her when she's walking down the hall, George added. Like George said though, tomorrow we start our part. The Creevy brothers are going to get us started. Every morning for the foreseeable future they are going to stand up in their seats in the Great Hall and sing Mull songs, then accuse Harry of confounding them. It should be pretty funny. What mole songs? Lily asked, as she laughed loudly. I think they are going to start out with some song called Magic Carpet Ride. I'm guessing that because of the title, it involves something magical. Fred said. James, Sirius, and Lily burst out laughing. That song was popular in the late 60s, early 70s. Lily said. We actually know that one. Lily used to sing it all the time, and that's how James and I know it. Sirius snorted. It's a shame that electronics can't be used at Hogwarts. There are some mole songs out there that would be so funny to have blaring in the Great Hall. Howlers! Lily exclaimed. All you do for a howler is set up recording quill and record yourself screaming. Recording quills will pick up anything, even music. I have a multi-tape deck here with all kinds of music and songs that James has bought over the years, and we can use the mirrors to record howler songs. Lily, that is brilliant! Sirius shouted gleefully. Whatever song the Creevey's do at breakfast, we can have the real song blaring during dinner. I can tell you what song and who sings it right after breakfast, and then you can find it in your tapes, or go and buy it, and we can record it after lunch. Wait, won't it explode and go off right away though? George asked. And why not just use the mirrors to play the songs? James grinned. Doing it through the mirrors won't work because the music won't be loud enough. However, howlers are charmed to explode after the recipient gets them, but they don't have to be. All Sirius has to do is walk into the Great Hall with it in his pocket, open it, then it will go off. After that, it just ends up like a normal letter. He explained, causing the twins to grin at him. It's brilliant. Fred laughed. We will tell the Creevey's what is going on, and we know they will die laughing. Tell them to pick good songs. Lily grinned. But what prank are you going to do tomorrow? Well, that is the second reason why we came here this evening. George laughed. We need Sirius's help with one of the pranks. He grinned, then he began outlining his plan. The next day was Monday, the start of a new week at Hogwarts, and the professors thought it was calm and quiet, until the Great Hall began to fill with students, who were all walking backwards. This had Fred and George written all over it, and apparently what had happened was, Godric snuck into all the dorms in Slytherin House, and charmed everyone to walk backwards for the whole day. Seeing as he was a founder, he could get into the girls' dorms without the stairs going wonky on him. Hermione and the twins got everyone in Gryffindor, while Luna and Terry Boot, a new troop, charmed everyone in Ravenclaw, and in Hufflepuff, Cedric, and Susan, who was also a new troop, were to blame. The professors didn't know it yet, but Sirius had walked behind the entire head table charming all of them, except Umbridge, to do the same. The entire Great Hall was talking about everyone walking backwards, and they were either laughing about it, or grumbling. Hermione, however, finally stood up with an angry scowl on her face. Harry! This is absolutely insane. How are we supposed to get to class walking backwards? She scolded, as she walked backwards beside the Gryffindor table with her hands on her hips. We are going to fall up a stair and break our necks. Her question was met with silence from Harry, but that did not stop everyone from giggling. Umbridge, though, looked ready to explode, until Minerva stood up. To her complete surprise, she also started walking backwards, causing everyone to burst out laughing. Oh dear! Whatever shall we do now? She asked, looking to Albus. He got up, and with more laughter from the students, he too began walking backwards. Well, it seems Harry has come up with a prank, though I am unclear on what the joke actually is, he said, as he calmly sat back down in his seat. Just make sure you are all careful when walking to class, he added, as Minerva sighed loudly and sat back down. Severus, don't get mad at Fred and George, Sirius whispered, as he leaned across Salazar, who was grinning like a fool. I was the one who charmed the professors. Severus glared at him, but chose to remain quiet, as Salazar snorted. "This ought to be an interesting day," he whispered, which only made Sirius grin. Salazar was about to say something else, but it was cut off as Umbridge finally exploded in anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she suddenly cried, as she got up and inched her way around the table. "Hey look, Umbridge is the oddball out," Fred called out loudly, causing everyone at the Gryffindor table to snort loudly. "I guess she is so rotten that she doesn't know how to have fun," George said loudly. "Either that or Harry couldn't be bothered by getting her. Hey Hermione, maybe that's why he didn't answer you. He's been running around the school all night charming people. He's probably asleep," Fred said. "Serves him right," she said sternly, as she tried to keep the grin off her face. "I demand this be fixed at once," Umbridge demanded. "This is not proper or orderly. This is nonsense. This is a school and we are here to learn." "Something tells me Harry doesn't care," Neville exclaimed. "And we are learning. We are learning how to walk backwards and not kill ourselves." "You be quiet, boy," she shouted, just as Colin and Dennis suddenly stood up on their seats. They began singing a good a cappella rendition of Magic Carpet Ride, which surprised many people because, who knew the Creevy boys could actually sing? When they were done, they stared around wildly with their hands covering their mouths. Umbridge tried to protest their performance, but an unseen silencing charm from Gordrick hit her in the back, causing her to rant silently. When the boys were done though, Gordrick reversed it, and Umbridge glared around the room, then at Dennis and Colin. "You two, what was that nonsense?" she yelled. "Harry confounded us," Dennis immediately cried, causing Umbridge's face to darken into a scowl. "It's a Mull song though. We recognize it," Colin announced. "Mull!" Umbridge shrieked. "How do the Mulls know about magic carpets? Who is violating the statute of secrecy?" "I don't know," Dennis said nonchalantly, as he sat back down and started eating again. "Mr. Potter, stop confounding people," Minerva half-heartedly scolded. "Ugh!" Blaise suddenly shouted from the Slytherin table, as he jumped a foot in the air. "Harry, don't do that." "Wait, what?" he asked, and then he nodded. "He says he's going to bed now. His work here is done." "Harry Potter, you get back here and set me right," Hermione demanded, as she tried not to laugh. Nothing was done though, and Umbridge immediately began screaming for the Aurors, who thanks to Gordrick's unseen spells, were now also walking backwards. "This is madness," Draco said in disbelief, as he looked around the laughing Great Hall. "That is what makes it so great, Draco, because it is madness," Blaise snorted. "We are just trying to drive her insane." "Why would you do that though?" Draco asked, as Blaise shrugged. "Number 1, we don't like her. Number 2, she tried to kill Harry at his trial. Number 3, she lied about being confounded, and we want to make her pay for it. Number 4, she tried to kill Nora, and number 5, because we can," Blaise said with a grin. "This year is going to be a lot different, Draco," Gordrick said, as he snorted when Umbridge started screaming again. "Just go with it. We aren't asking you to take part in anything, but if you have an idea, feel free to share." "Between Fred and George, I don't think you're going to need my ideas," Draco said quietly. "That's not true. We can always use more ideas. Everyone is welcome to pitch in, but if you don't want to, that's fine. Just remember, when we do these big pranks like this, we are going to get you to cover our tracks." "I know, but this walking backwards thing is bloody annoying," Draco grumbled. "It'll be gone by the end of the day, lad," Gordrick chuckled. "Don't worry." Draco sighed and shook his head. "All right. I just don't understand you people," he said, causing Gordrick and Blaise to burst out laughing. The rest of the day passed by fairly easy, with the exception of the whole school walking backwards, which caused Umbridge to scowl and yell about it not being proper. However, when dinner rolled round, everyone thought it was going to a quiet meal, until Sirius opened the howler. Having magic carpet ride blaring in the Great Hall caused everyone to stare around in awe, but no one was more surprised than the Creevy brothers, who were stunned speechless. Hermione, however, got up, danced, backwards, and sang along, then accused Harry of confounding her. No one figured out where the song came from, but Fred and George explained it to the Creevies, who thought it was just so wicked. Umbridge started another round of yelling, which caused everyone to grin. Then she shouted about Mole devices not working at Hogwarts, and demanded to know how this had happened. Sirius only grinned, and kept quiet. When Umbridge stormed out the Great Hall yelling about moles, magic carpets, and the Statue of Secrecy, nearly everyone broke down with laughter. Well, except a few Slytherins, who glared at everyone. They seemed to be insulted by having been forced to listen to something mole. The Forest of Dean was a dirty, disgusting place if you once lived in luxury, and Lucius Malfoy hated it with a passion. He had been forced to use fiend fire to destroy his manor, but he managed to salvage a few things before he did. He grabbed a few books, paintings of old family members, and the tent he and his family used during the Quidditch World Cup, but other than that, there was nothing left to salvage. Everything worth anything had already been sold to that they could afford to eat after Black kicked Narcissa out the family, but Lucius had managed to scrape together what little bit of food was left to take with him. However, he had no one to cook it for him. He had ordered the last two of his elves, the ones the Dark Lord hadn't killed for being slow or incompetent, and ordered them to come with him to care for him. To say they declined was an understatement. They severed their own bonds and scowled at their foul master, before saying they chose to die with dignity. Then they paraded away, leaving Lucius to fend for himself. He hated the foul beasts that left him to rot in the forest, because he had no idea what he was doing. He burned all the good food trying to cook it himself and had been forced to throw it all away. Now Lucius had nothing. No clean clothes were left for him to wear, and he didn't know how to clean them. He had no knowledge of cleaning charms, because he considered them useless to learn. Lucius had always had someone doing it all for him, and he had no money to buy books to learn them. Lucius scowled as he looked around his meager camp. Sure, his tent was okay, and at least it provided a roof over his head, but it did little else. His small, protected camp looked like a jail cell to him, and the only living things he encountered was a few animals that he killed for his meager, burnt, and tasteless meals. He saw moles every once in a while when he was out hunting, but he didn't dare to mess with them. Lucius knew that if the Ministry caught wind of moles dying mysteriously in the Forest of Dean, then Potter would somehow get wind of it, and come looking for the cause. No, it was best to leave the filthy moles to themselves, lest Potter find him. Lucius wanted to stay alive, because he wanted to get revenge. Revenge on his traitorous wife and son, and revenge on Potter and Dumbledore. Lucius fully believed that his current state of affairs was all their fault, and he needed to find a way to get back into his master's good graces. It was the only way to gain some of his decency back, and if he pleased the Dark Lord by bringing him the dead bodies of his wife and son, Lucius would at least be forgiven. Then he would be clothed, fed, and clean. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain, so he sat in his tent and plotted his revenge. It had been 3 days since the twins did the walking backwards prank, and so far nothing else had really happened, with the exception of Dennis and Colin singing and Sirius playing the real version of the song at dinner. So far they had done Symphony of Destruction, which caused Umbridge to yell because of the lyrics and the topic, especially after Dean shouted about it being the perfect song for the Ministry. The day after that, they sang Youth Gone Wild by Skid Row, and when Sirius played the official version at dinner, it caused Umbridge to freak out thinking Harry was planning a school rebellion. That morning though, the Creevies took a lighter tone with Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog, and this song surprisingly made Umbridge angrier than the other ones. She started yelling about students calling those with authority names and promised to throw everyone in detention if they were caught humming the song. No one really understood her behavior at first, but then Hermione said it was because of the word bullfrog and looked at them pointedly. That sent the rest of the conspirators into a fit of laughter, but no one really understood how Umbridge came to that conclusion, seeing the song was about spreading joy and the word bullfrog was only mentioned once. However, it was because of this morning's antics that Umbridge was stomping through the school with a feral grin on her face, as she headed towards the defense classroom. "You all have done excellent work over the last few weeks," Salazar said, as he smiled approvingly around at his fifth-year Gryffindors and Slytherins. "I am convinced that you all have a firm grasp of the shield charm and the reviving spell. However, you all need to work on your silent casting. Some of you are still shouting out the spells, while others are whispering loudly. With that said, I am pleased with most of you all's essay work on the stunning spell, so we are going to start that today. Who can demonstrate for me the wand movement and incantation?" he asked. To no one's surprise, Hermione's hand shot in the air, but Salazar decided to call on Not. The boy stood up and faced Salazar with a determined look. "I'm ready when you are." Salazar smiled. The boy took a deep breath and raised his wand. "Stupefy!" he cried, as he made a jabbing motion with his wand. The red light burst forth from his wand, and Salazar nodded approvingly as he easily brought up a shield charm. "Very good, Mr. Knott. 10 points to Slytherin. However, you need to work on the strength of your spell, as well as silent casting. If someone were to be hit with that one, they would wake up on their own within a few minutes." "Yes, sir," Knott said, but he still looked pleased with himself. "All right, we are going to do something different today, so here is what I want you all to do. Pair up with a person of your choice, and you all are going to practice the shield charm, reviving spell, and the stunning spell. Godric, no unseen spells," Salazar added with a grin, which caused Godric to roll his eyes. Yeah, he laughed. "I'm a duelist though. It's natural. I don't care. No unseen spells, or I will put you in detention." Salazar chuckled, causing the students to giggle, and Godric to laugh again. "I'd like to see you try. And I'd like to see you try and get out of it. I hear lions don't like to be caged." Salazar responded with a wicked grin, causing the students to giggle again. They had gotten used to the playful bantering of their professor and Gordy. Godric grunted his response, but grinned as he stood up and nudged Draco in the arm. The rest of the students paired up, as Salazar banished the desks to the side of the room. This should be easy for Longbottom, seeing as he cast a wandless stunner last year. Pansy sneered, as she glared at Neville, who had paired up with Ron. "Yeah, let's see you do that again, Longbottom." Crabbe snorted. Ron paled as he glanced nervously at Neville, but Neville only rolled his eyes. Godric, however, glanced sharply at Pansy. He did it out of fear and desperation. Salazar and I held that little demonstration to show that it was possible for anyone to do that in those types of circumstances. Doing it consciously with a wand is something totally different though, Godric said, as Salazar nodded in agreement. "It's impossible to do that consistently though," Pansy said with a snooty flip of her hair. "Even for you. Do you want to find out? Go stand over there, and you and I will face off," Godric said, pointing to the back wall. Pansy narrowed her eyes at him, but huffed. "No thank you, I wouldn't want you to make a fool of yourself. Gryffindor," she snarled. Nearly all of the Gryffindor students glared and pointed their wands at her, but Godric held his hand up to stop them from doing anything. "Don't worry about it. She's only afraid to be proven wrong. Let her continue on with her ignorant arrogance. She'll likely pay for it one day," he said, causing the Gryffindors to smirk at the furiously scowling girl. Then he glanced at Salazar, who stood beside his desk watching the situation with amusement. "Sorry about that, Pierre." "Not a problem. Now remember, I want you all to do this silently, so off you go," Salazar said with a nod. Then he motioned for them to get started. The room became a flurry of activity as everyone set about trying to stun each other and shield themselves. Salazar knew that Ron, Hermione, Blaise, and Neville already had a firm grasp on the stunning spell, seeing as that was taught to them over the summer, but having to do it silently somewhat made up for the advantage they had over the other students. Salazar was pleased with what he was seeing from his, admittedly, favorite students, but both Ron and Blaise, who was paired up with Hermione, needed to work on their silent casting. There was a lot of whispering going on, but every once in a while someone would shout Protego in a moment of desperation. They had been practicing for a good 15 minutes, and Salazar was busy helping Lavender and Parvati when he saw a sudden flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. He stopped and turned to the back wall of the classroom, and felt his stomach drop to the floor. "Stop!" he commanded in a loud voice, which stilled everyone's movement instantly. The students followed his gaze to the back wall, and behind him Salazar heard several gasps, and a few breathless uh-ohs. Umbridge had charmed the back wall of the classroom to be see-through, and she was grinning like a cat who had just caught a mouse. She grinned even wider when she caught the stunned looks on all of the students' faces, but waggled her stubby finger in an I-told-you-so manner, before she bolted down the corridor. Salazar just stood there stunned trying to process what happened, but Godric shoved him roughly from behind. "Get after her, you fool!" he shouted, and Salazar bolted out the classroom door. He knew which direction she went, but he couldn't see any sign of her at all, and given her size and short stature, he knew she wasn't very fast. Damn! She under a disillusionment charm. He thought wildly to himself. He knew he needed to catch her, so that he could obliviate her and the incantation for see-through charm from her mind, but he couldn't do that if he couldn't find her. He needed help. Lots of help. He immediately cast a disillusionment charm on himself, and in the next moment, he cast a voice-amplifying charm. "Emeralda, your assistance is needed in the entrance hall. Get there as soon as you can. Umbridge has caught Pierre teaching, and she is under a disillusionment charm, so you are the only one who can spot her. Do not let her leave the castle," he roared, as he made his way towards the entrance hall. He knew Umbridge was probably headed that way to operate off the grounds, and he was already on the first floor, when another voice boomed through the castle. "Speaker, the minions say she's in the second-floor corridor, and just turned towards the staircase. Now she is speeding up the staircase towards the third floor." "Wait, what? Damn. How did she know that shortcut?" Nora said. Salazar nearly stopped in his tracks, but then he remembered that Nora was with Fred and George, and they had the map. There was no doubt in his mind that they had cast a voice-amplifying charm on her, and was telling her to repeat everything they said. He cursed though, because he was going the wrong direction, so he turned around and ran as fast as he could towards the third floor. "Speaker, you need to hurry. Horrors are coming from every direction because of our language, and believe it or not, a team of them are headed right for you." "I'm disillusioned. They can't spot me." "Good to know," she replied. Speaker, she either didn't know that shortcut led to the fifth floor, or she didn't care, but it looks like she is starting to panic now. She's running back and forth looking for a way out. Keep going because the team of horrors is behind you now. Salazar grinned to himself as he sped down a nearby shortcut that led to the fifth floor, but he cursed and turned around when Nora's slightly panicked voice blurted out, "She's headed for her office. Fourth floor." He raced back down the shortcut he was in, which was on the third floor. This was because the stairs to the fourth floor were right beside the exit, and he knew this would be the faster way. "Stop, Speaker!" Nora shouted. "More errors are right in front of you at the end of that shortcut." Salazar screeched to a halt, and waited with bated breath until Nora gave the all-clear. Then he cautiously exited the shortcut, and made a beeline for the stairs to the fourth floor. "Hurry, Speaker, Dumbly appears to be distracting those errors. She is coming down the opposite way you are." He sped up his running, and skidded to a halt on the fourth floor, then narrowed his eyes. He was trying to spot any movement he could, and hoped that Umbridge wasn't proficient with the disillusionment charm. Luck wasn't with him though, because he couldn't see anything. "Where is she from my position?" he asked, trying to control his breathing. "Running fast towards her door, Speaker. Hurry." There. Halfway down the corridor he spotted her office door open, and raced towards it. He was almost there when it slammed shut, and he crashed into it with a sickening crunch. "I just broke my arm," he shouted, as he winced with pain, but then he blasted the door off its hinges. He raced inside, but heard Umbridge yelp loudly as pieces of the door flew everywhere. Then to his complete horror, her fireplace erupted in green flames. "The Ministry!" She screamed frantically, and then she was gone before he could hit her with a stunning spell. "Speaker! She's gone. Where did she go?" Nora cried. Salazar winced in pain, and sighed in defeat. "Son of Morgana!" he roared in English to let everyone know it had all went horribly wrong. Then he blasted her office desk apart. "She flew out, my dear. She's gone." "Don't worry, Speaker, I will bite her, and then we can feed her to the shrew," Nora replied, causing Salazar to shake his head and sigh again. "I've broken my arm, so I'll need some time to heal it. Don't worry about me though, I'll be fine," he said, and ran out of the office and headed towards the fifth floor, just as Rose rounded the corner from the third floor. He needed to get to Poppy fast, so that she could heal his arm quickly. It wouldn't look good if Pierre showed up anywhere with a broken arm. "I knew it. I knew it," Umbridge shrieked to Fudge. "I knew that worthless man wasn't teaching the proper material." She had just spent an hour telling him what she saw in the defense classroom, and the resulting chase that followed, and she was not happy about any of it. Apparently Potter was trying to protect that Robillard fellow, but lucky for you, your flu is the only one operational in the castle, Fudge said. "I hate to think about what would have happened if Potter had caught you," he added with a shiver. "How dare that blasted Potter chase me all over the castle. I'll make him pay, you watch and see," she shouted. "Calm down, Dolores. I'll sign this order of dismissal for Robillard. You said he was teaching the students how to fight, and we can't have that," Fudge said with a scowl. "As for Potter, when we catch him, we will add the charge of endangering a ministry official." "I'm confused though, you said there was 2 sets of voices speaking Parseltongue?" "Yes," she hissed through gritted teeth. "One was Potter's because I recognized it, but the other leaves me baffled. I don't know who it could have been, but it sounded feminine. I can't be sure though, because who really knows with that awful, evil language? Could it be Potter's pet snake Cora, or whatever its name is?" Fudge asked, looking at her curiously. "I don't know how she could cast a voice-amplifying charm herself. She's a snake," Umbridge snapped. "Unless someone did it for her, which means Potter has help," Fudge replied irritably. He didn't appreciate her current tone, but was willing to let it slide, considering what the poor woman had just been through. "Potter was able to find you, even if you were running around under a disillusionment charm. That implies he has help. We need to find out who is helping him. It could be anyone in that castle. Nearly the whole school believes this immortal founder and Merlin nonsense. There are only very few people who thinks it's rubbish." "And who are they?" Fudge asked curiously. "My sources in Slytherin House. The Montague, Crabbe, Goyle, and Knott boys, along with the Parkinson, Bulstrode, and Carrow girls," she replied. Yes, all good upstanding families," Fudge said, as he nodded vigorously. "Well, here is what we do. Tonight at dinner I'll go with you so that we can dismiss Robillard. We will take Amelia and some more errors. We only have 15 at Hogwarts right now, but we can afford to add a few more. It will be all right, Dolores, you will see." "Why dinner?" she asked curiously. Potter is less likely to try anything dangerous in the Great Hall when it's filled with children, so we can fire Robillard relatively safely," he answered. "Not to mention, it will make a public statement that we are not afraid to get rid of those professors who are substandard. Maybe the rest will think twice about crossing you." "An excellent idea," Umbridge replied. "But I want guards outside my office and living quarter-doors at all times. I don't feel safe there, especially after what just happened." "Very well, and who do you have in mind to replace Robillard?" he asked. She smirked at him. "Me," she said, as her eyes glittered dangerously. "How did she know to do that charm?" Hermione demanded, as she threw her books down onto a study table in the snake pit. Classes were over for the day, and Pierre had seriously looked worried all day long, which translated into "I don't know what the hell to do now" to all of those in the know. The rumors were flying all over the school about what happened, and no one knew for sure what was going to happen next. "It's not really that hard, Hermione, and the charm is in the library. My guess is, she got the idea from here," a worried Godric said, as he pointed to the ceiling, and decided to use it on the classroom wall. Hermione scowled and started to say something, but was cut off by Blaise. "What is going to happen now? What is Harry and Professor Robillard's plan?" "I don't know," Godric said, as he shook his head nervously. "I don't know what's going to happen now. He's probably going to get fired, and when he does, we will be stuck reading that stupid Slinkhard book." Neville grumbled as he leaned back and crossed his arms. "Where does that leave us though?" Draco asked. "I mean, we can't learn what we need to for our OWLs, and you can bet Umbridge will replace Professor Robillard with someone who will teach what the Ministry wants them to. We have to ramp up our efforts to get rid of her," Colin said with determination. "I'm sure everything will be fine in the long run. We will think of something," Luna said, as she looked at everyone with an encouraging smile. "I hope you're right, Luna," Godric said with a sigh. "I really hope you're right, and Colin, you are right. We need to double our efforts in, not just getting rid of that woman, but getting the truth out. I'll talk to Salazar about writing that letter to Rita, but right now, something tells me he has other pressing matters on his mind." Everyone nodded knowingly, but they were scared about what may happen next. As Salazar walked into the Great Hall for dinner, nearly everyone present began whispering and pointing in his direction. He knew that they knew his time was short, and Salazar fully believed that they were right. Umbridge's hatred of him because of Pierre's blood status pretty much guaranteed that his role as Pierre was quickly coming to an end. If Salazar was right about Umbridge, she was going to make an example out of him by displaying the power she now had to fire professors. Unfortunately, however, there was nothing Salazar could do to prevent it. But he did have a plan. Admittedly, it was a crappy plan, but he still had a plan. It was a plan to make her doubt herself, but more importantly, her eyes. If he could make her doubt her eyes and become paranoid, he might just cause her to break down in the long run. To say that he hated this woman was an understatement, and he wanted her to suffer. He didn't care what it took, he was going to bring her down off her high horse. She may have won this battle, but she would not win the war. It pained Salazar though, as he sat down in his seat and looked out over the Great Hall at all the sad faces that were gazing at him. These children were going to waste a whole year learning rubbish while a real war was quietly beginning outside the gates of Hogwarts. He knew he needed to do something, but right now he didn't know what. However, if it took Harry bursting into common rooms at random times to teach these children defense, well then by Merlin Salazar was going to do it. "Are you okay?" Severus whispered quietly, making a point to not look at him. "No, Severus, I'm not. I don't really know what to do right now, and I'm still pissed off that she got away." "Well, according to Fred and George, she hasn't come back to the castle all day," Severus replied. "They had potions as their last class." "I'm grateful for their quick thinking. Do you know where they were when it all happened?" "They were in herbology," Apparently Pomona cast a quick notice me not over them, and they got to work. I'm grateful, Salazar said with a nod, as Sirius sat down next to him. What's the plan? I'm up for anything. I have a plan, but you all need to stay far away from it. It's a crappy plan and I'm not happy with any of it, but it's the best I can come up with on such short notice. Salazar sighed. What are you going to do? Severus asked nervously. You're about to find out, Salazar said, as the Great Hall's doors opened. Umbridge walked in with Fudge on one side and a scowling Amelia on the other. They were surrounded by Sixers, and the ones that were already in the Great Hall stood up at once and joined them as they approached the head table. Umbridge looked smug as she stood there smiling sweetly at all the professors, who glared at her in return. Then she turned to Salazar, and her smile changed into a smirk. Pierre Robillard, it is my right and my duty as Hogwarts High Inquisitor to inform you that you are hereby fired from your position as Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, she said, as she stood there with a triumphant gleam in her eye. Salazar stood up and glared at her. On what grounds? She looked slightly taken aback, but she smugly smiled. On the grounds of not teaching properly approved ministry material. And what material would that be? He asked calmly. There is no need to be teaching practical defense when theory is all they need to pass the class, she answered. And what is the exact theory you, Madam Umbridge, and the rest of your colleagues wish the students to learn? Salazar asked, not taking his eyes off the woman. He saw her jaw set, and she ground her teeth together slightly. That magical defense is not necessary. You should try to reason with opponents rather than engaging them in a fight, she answered with a smug smile. Just so that we are clear, you wish to start breeding a generation of weak and defenseless witches and wizards, Salazar said with a nod. I understand now. Thank you for clarifying. She stared at him with a calculating gaze, but then she tilted her head to the side. Well, Mr. Robillard, she said with a slight sneer. You may leave now. You are no longer needed. Perhaps you should go and apply to a mole school. You have after all, taught them before. Yes, I have, and I do not deny it. However, you seem to be confused, madam. He snarled. Just because you're firing me, doesn't mean I'm leaving Hogwarts. He immediately saw her, Fudge, and the others stiffen in alarm. What do you mean? She asked nervously. You can fire me, but you can't make me leave Hogwarts, he said simply. You are fired, Mr. Robillard. You will allow these errors to escort you to the defense classroom, you will pack your things, and you will leave, she demanded with a stomp of her foot. No, I won't, he said with a sly grin. Merlin now, he suddenly shouted. Instantly, Umbridge, Fudge, Amelia, and the errors were surrounded by a golden cage, and Merlin lifted his disillusionment charm. They cried out in shock and fear, and tried to fire spells or flee, but they found themselves rooted to the spot, unable to move. That's not Merlin, that's not Merlin, Umbridge screamed. Oh, but I assure you, woman, I am, Merlin replied with deadly seriousness, causing Fudge to pale drastically, and Umbridge to loudly deny it again. Hogwarts, quietly lift the anti-disapparition jinx from the Great Hall, and the anti-apparition jinx in the defense classroom please, Salazar thought, as he glared at those trapped in Merlin's golden cage. You see, Umbridge, I must make a confession, Salazar said with a smile. I'm not who I say I am. Then who are you? She demanded, as a panicked look appeared on her face. I find that every once in a while I must shed my skin, he said cryptically, as he smiled evilly at her. Then reached up into his robe sleeve to cut the flesh in the crook of his arm. Just like a snake. He inserted the polyjuice rock, and quickly healed the wound. Then he watched with glee as a look of horror appeared on all their faces as he began to change, but he smirked at Umbridge. Harry Potter, she screamed. Just like a snake, I must shed my skin. I must discard the old one, and embrace a new one. Who shall I become next? A random mull off the street, Minister Fudge, or perhaps an error? Maybe even you, Madam Umbridge? He said, as a look of horror and understanding appeared on all their faces. Pierre Robillard doesn't even exist. He is someone that I made up. Merlin and I forged the credentials so that I could hide in plain sight, but whose skin should I wear next? I vote random mull Salazar. They can't be identified, Merlin said with a smirk. I agree, he said, but then he turned to Albus, who sat there in shock. Forgive me, Headmaster. I lied to you in order to get the job. I hope you can forgive me. Very clever, Harry, and very cunning, Albus said with a gentle smile, as his eyes twinkled merrily. Salazar bowed slightly, but then he turned back to Umbridge and Fudge. You can't make me leave Hogwarts. You can try to capture me, but just like I told Voldemort in the graveyard, you will always fail. You may have gotten me out of the teaching role, but I can always assume other roles, he said, as he tapped the side of his nose thoughtfully. Yes, perhaps a new hire at the ministry. Merlin, you and I can forge the needed documents for that, can't we? Of course we can. Need you ask? He laughed, as Fudge's eyes widened in alarm. A new era perhaps, or even an existing one. A student here maybe, or an existing one. Yes, just like a snake, I must shed my skin. I could be anyone, and do anything, Salazar cried happily. And they will never know who, what, and where you are, Salazar. It's brilliant, you know, Merlin said, as he tried not to laugh. Indeed, my old friend. Indeed, Salazar said. Well, I guess I better start planning then. Good luck getting into the defense classroom. I'll leave the flames indoor, along with your little see-through wall. You may even see me in it from time to time, because that is where I plan to stay. However, when you look in there and see me sitting, reading, or whatever I feel like doing, ask yourself this: is it really me, or is it Merlin posing as me? It's up for you to decide, he said with a sly grin. All of you who can understand this, meet me in the defense classroom after dinner under a disillusionment charm. We will talk then, and form a better stinking plan than this crap. The new key to get through the door has been placed in all your pockets by Dobby, he said, as Umbridge, Fudge, and Amelia began screaming for more errors. Salazar apparated out first, then Merlin lifted his cage, and quickly followed him. Umbridge let out a scream of rage, and Amelia, who was trying not to grin, began barking orders at the errors to start searching the castle. Fudge was white-faced with shock, and could only stare at the spot Salazar and Merlin disappeared from. Meanwhile, Albus laughed loudly, while Sirius grinned like a fool. Severus was sneering, and the rest of the professors were whispering excitedly. Half of the students were in shock, while others cheered and began talking among themselves. Godric, on the other hand, laughed and fell out of his seat because Sirius had just opened the howler, and Jeremiah was a bullfrog began blaring in the Great Hall. A better stinking plan? Harry, it's a brilliant plan, Hermione's disembodied voice cried, as she sat in the defense classroom. You're going to make her paranoid, and Fudge too. Maybe because of what you said about infiltrating the ministry, Fudge will tighten security. They might even catch a few Death Eaters. I did not think about that, but you are right, Hermione, Salazar said, as he gazed out of the open classroom window. He was doing his best to make it appear that he wasn't talking to anyone because Umbridge was watching him. I'm sure Amelia will let us know what's going on in the ministry at our next meeting. I have no doubts that she will have lots of information. Merlin chuckled, as Salazar nodded, but then he sighed. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you all about all this, but I felt it best if you not know. I wanted to protect you all from any backlash. Albus, I really do hope you can forgive me for deceiving you like that. Salazar said, as he and Dobby vanished all the desks and began replacing them with couches, tables, and other furnishings that Dobby had brought from Salazar's flat. "I do forgive you, Harry, so don't worry. I shouldn't have been so surprised, truth be told," Albus's disembodied voice said with chuckle. Salazar grinned in his direction, but then turned to Dobby. "Be careful when you bring in the potions lab, and please put it next to the back wall. Half of what I'll be brewing Umbridge and the Eras likely won't be able to recognize, but I plan to start brewing polyjuice soon. That's unmistakable, and will only give credence to what I said tonight." "Yes sir, Mr. Harry Salazar Potter Slytherin sir," the elf cried happily, and popped away. Umbridge was glaring at him from the other side of the wall, but Salazar only waved merrily at her, then turned to ignore her. "So what do we do now, Harry?" Neville asked. "Without you teaching us, we aren't going to learn anything." Salazar sighed and shook his head. "I don't know, Neville, but we will think of something." "I wonder who our new defense teacher will be," Blaise said. "Umbridge, more than likely." Albus sighed. "Well, she certainly can't use this classroom." George snorted. "Professor, see if you can't give her the crappiest room in the castle. It should make her angry." Albus chuckled. "We will see, Mr. Weasley." "So Harry, you're just going to flaunt yourself in here?" Blaise asked in disbelief. "Yep, right under their noses. They can't get to me in here, but I must caution you all. If you come in here to visit, make sure you are under a disillusionment charm. Until the Eras get their glasses, that is, then we can't be in here at all," Godric pointed out. "That's true," Salazar said with a nod, as Dobby popped back in with some potions equipment. "It's too bad Rita wasn't here to see all that." Neville snorted. "I know, but speaking of Godric, I have written a letter to her. It's in my office, so you can give it to Nahum whenever you like," Salazar said, as he finished arranging his personal books on a nearby bookshelf. "I wrote it yesterday, but haven't gotten a chance to give it to you." Salazar heard Godric shuffle up the stairs, but then he turned to Neville. "There is a reason why I asked Umbridge all those questions. If Rita agrees to work with us, I plan to show her that memory. She can write about what the Ministry is trying to teach, so that when Voldemort comes out of the shadows, they can't deny that they were trying to make you all defenseless." "Question, Harry?" Blaise asked. "What is the plan now? I mean, obviously you aren't going to work at the Ministry, so what do you plan to do?" Salazar sighed and shook his head. "I don't know, Blaise. Help you all with pranks, I suppose, or just give Umbridge a hard time. She can see me, but she can't get to me, and it will eat away at her," he said, as he grinned towards the window. Umbridge was still there, but now Fudge had joined her, along with Amelia and Afuras, and they began trying to blast holes in the wall. Amelia looked afraid at first, but after they realized that their attempts were failing, and the fact that Salazar looked unconcerned and even laughed at their efforts, she began to relax a bit. "Well, at least you can get in and out by apparating, because I have no doubt she will have Eras stationed by the door," Albus said. "Especially since they can't get in." "I know." Salazar grinned, as he began to arrange the potions lab to his liking. "I can't believe that Umbridge got one over on you of all people," Hermione said as she shook her head. "I know, and that irritates me to no end. I had no idea that she'd think of charming the wall to be see-through, but I have to hand it to her, it was clever. I was hoping I'd last until at least Christmas, but I didn't even last a mouth. Rest assured though, I will not let it happen again," he said, and he glared in Umbridge's direction. The sudden fierce scowl aimed at her caused Umbridge to look a bit startled, but she smirked and said something to Fudge, who nodded vigorously. It made Salazar a little uneasy, but Amelia was there, so he wasn't that badly worried. Umbridge glared back at him, then lifted her wand and wrote in fiery letters, "Where is Dumbledore?" Salazar grinned and wrote back, "Uopi, and laughed when she had to tilt her head to the side so that she could read the backwards and upside down words. She stood there for a full minute trying to work them out, but then she glared at him. "Yes, you do. Uopi on," he replied, and grinned as she glared at him. Albus only laughed. "Well, perhaps I better go, so that I can see what they want. You all should head back to your common rooms." "How do we get out?" Fred, who laughed at the upside-down words, asked. "Apparat into the Gryffindor common room. I've already asked Hogwarts to lift the wards there, in the headmaster's office, and the snake pit," Albus replied. "Yes, sir," the children chorused. "Harry, just get us if you need to. We can still use patronuses." Hermione giggled, as Fudge stared at the upside-down letters that were still burning in midair. "I will." Salazar grinned. They all said goodnight to each other, then Salazar heard several pops as they apparated out. "My dear, are we alone?" "No speaker," Nora replied. "There is still one left." "It's me," Severus said with a chuckle. "You really don't have a plan though, do you?" "No, Severus, I don't." Salazar sighed, as he began to get the rest of the potions lab situated, as Dobby popped back in with more equipment and ingredients. "You'll think of something, I'm sure," the young man replied. "I hope so. I really do hope so," he said. Then Severus apparated out as well, knowing Salazar had lifted the ward in his personal living quarters deep in the heart of Oxford, in an old abandoned warehouse surrounded by protective enchantments and mole-repelling charms. Rita Skeeter sat in a rickety wooden chair poring over the latest Daily Prophet, and shaking her head in disgust. She just couldn't believe the nonsense being spewed by those in the ministry. Truth be told, she never believed anything they said really, simply because she knew how those people could be. They were corrupt, wicked, and downright delusional. Granted, she herself wasn't much better, seeing as she tore people down in her interviews, articles, and writings, but at least she had some common sense. She believed Harry's story and she knew that times were changing, but those in charge of the wizarding world were going to get people killed if they kept denying the truth. It is why she was hiding in the middle of Oxford. She left the blurb in her last article about moving to a different country, but she was a journalist and needed to be where the action was, even if it was non-existent at the moment. In her heart though, Rita knew that one day, if she lived through the war, she could write a book detailing everything that happened with all of the ministry cover-ups, and who was responsible for all the truth denial. That would be a big money maker, and it made her smile at the very idea of watching all those people tumble from power. She sighed as she looked around her dusty abode though. How was she ever going to accomplish her goals if she kept hiding in the middle of Mull Oxford? She truly needed to be somewhere else, maybe Mull London, but she couldn't risk it. She just knew that if whoever found her, she'd die because of some of the things she published about him. Not to mention, she'd be killed because of her fondness for Harry Potter. But it was still a choice she had to make. Should she pack up and leave her safe spot in order to get the story of a lifetime? She had a roof, a bed, some clothes, and she had turned a number of galleons into pounds so that she could eat from the local Mull cafes and restaurants. It was still slightly depressing though, because the warehouse was dirty, damp, and smelled strongly of mold, but it kept her safe. Still though, she wanted to be in the middle of it all. She sighed again, looked around, then back down at the latest copy of the paper. Apparently, Ares had been sent to Hogwarts to capture Harry Potter, who was running around the school giving the ministry grief, and according to Fudge, possibly planning to take over the ministry with Dumbledore. It made her laugh. Something told her that Potter wanted nothing to do with the ministry, but Rita wasn't surprised that Potter had aligned himself with Dumbledore, especially now that who was back. She was glad for that really, because it meant they all had a chance to make it through the upcoming war alive, and with any luck, Potter and Dumbledore could bring down who for good. Rita continued to read the paper, and was lost in the fashion section when a burst of flames in the corner of the warehouse caught her eye. She cried out in fear and instantly transformed into her beetle form, then flew under the chair she had just been sitting in. Her small ears and eyes tracked the sound of rushing wind and wings as her feathery visitor landed on the small table she had just been sitting at. She dared not make a move though, lest the bird spot her and try to eat her. Her breathing became quick and panicky though, as the bird hopped down onto the floor. From her vantage point under the chair, she tried to make herself as small as possible when she caught sight of the deadly-looking golden talons of the bird. Then, her heart nearly stopped when a large black eye peered under the chair, and looked directly at her. She looked at it curiously when she caught sight of a letter clutched in its golden beak, and her heart leapt in her throat when the bird began to sing softly. However, it began to comfort her as she sat there watching it watch her, and that is when she realized that the bird was a phoenix. Roffin's phoenix to be exact. Rita remembered the bird from her interview with Harry, so she decided to take a leap of faith that the phoenix wasn't going to make her a snack, and flew out from underneath the chair. She landed on the seat so she could look at it properly, and it was then she realized that the letter in its beak was addressed specifically to her. Tilting her small head to the side, she quickly glanced around, then transformed back into her human form. With a shaking hand, she took the letter from him, causing the bird to thrill softly, take flight, and once again land on the table. She stared at it in awe for a moment, but then smiled as she opened the letter. My dearest Rita, I hope you weren't terribly afraid when Nahum showed up, and if you were, I deeply apologize for scaring you. I'm writing to you with a plea for help. I know that you are in hiding, so I'm unsure if you have been keeping up with the news, but the ministry is denying the truth and blocking it at every turn. We need your help with spreading the truth, and we know that the Daily Prophet is not going to print it, but we have another solution. A friend of mine is the daughter of the editor of the Quibbler. Now before you wrinkle your nose, but don't worry, I'll understand if you do. He is the only independent source we have of getting the truth out, and we are hoping that you will write the articles that we plan to publish. People know your name, and we are hoping that because you're so well known, that they will believe the truth, no matter what source it's published in. I understand that you are in hiding for a very good reason, and I understand if you're hesitant to do this, but we can offer you safety at Hogwarts. Albus has already said that he is willing to offer you room here if you are willing to do this. The ministry woman Umbridge is here though, and reports everything back to Fudge, so if you do come, you will have to snoop around and spy on her in that lovely little beetle form of yours. I know that may come as a shock that I know that, but if you knew who I really was, it may not come as such a surprise that I figured it out. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm afraid that I haven't been very honest with you in the past, but last year my friend Gordy Ruffin and I couldn't afford to spill the beans on who we really are. He is really Godric Gryffindor, and I'm actually Salazar Slytherin. I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. We are immortal and it's time the world knows about us, and the one who helped us to achieve immortality. Merlin. I know you are shocked, and a part of you probably doesn't believe it, but that's okay. However, while the students and professors at Hogwarts know about us, the rest of the wizarding world doesn't, and that is just some of the truth the ministry has been denying. It all needs to be told. Voldemort knows who we are, and even though the majority of the wizarding world believes the rubbish being spread by the ministry, there will come a time when Voldemort makes his move, and they will be proven wrong. We are hoping that by telling the wizarding world of our existence that it will help quell their fears, and give them some measure of hope. Not to mention, we hope it will save lives. That's why we need you, Rita, and I hope that you will come to Hogwarts, listen to Merlin, Godric, and my story, write it, publish it, and get the truth out in front of everyone. If you agree to help us, please let Nahum bring you to Hogwarts. He will drop you off in the living quarters we have set up for you, and from there we will set up a meeting in the headmaster's office with Albus, Godric, Merlin, myself, and a few others who are on our side. If you need time to think about it, please send a note back with Nahum, and if you decide at a later date to do this, just call for him. He has been asked to listen for your call. I hope we can work together on this, and I know it is asking a lot, especially in these dangerous times, but I hope you will agree because we really do need your help. I hope to hear from you soon. Sincerely yours, Harry James Potter. Also known as Salazar Slytherin. It took Rita nearly 5 times to read it through before all its contents sank in. When they did, she sat back in her seat and let out the long, deep breaths she had been holding. She couldn't believe it. It just seemed so unreal, but as she gazed at the phoenix, something made her pause as she thought about some of the things Harry Potter had told her last year. It makes better sense for an immortal founder to build onto Hogwarts instead of 2 teenagers. It also makes better sense for an immortal Godric Gryffindor to have a phoenix bonded to him, versus a random Slytherin boy. Not to mention how someone like Harry could control Slytherin's 1,000-year-old basilisk, she said, as she looked at Nahum. He thrilled softly and nodded as if he understood her, which only made her smile. You truly are a beautiful bird, she said softly, as she gently stroked his red feathers. But can they really keep me safe if I do this? Nahum nodded again, and a sense of calm and peace filled Rita as she kept stroking him. I guess I can always escape if there is trouble. She chuckled. Will you give me a few minutes to pack my bag? Nahum nodded once more, and Rita began packing. A part of her still didn't believe any of Harry's claims, but if this were true, it would be the story of a lifetime.
I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Before we close the video, I noticed 53% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!